welcome everybody. We're going to get this thing kicked off. Welcome to our webinar today, SRE as a Service, Transforming DevOps from Build to Run. Excited to be here and get ourselves going. So let's talk a little bit about a few housekeeping items about this webinar. So yes, we are recording. We will provide the recording after the webinar and to everybody that registered. So folks that showed up late or weren't able to make it today, will definitely get a copy. Please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen down there. We will be leaving time at the end for questions. We have a great panel today and we'll get to as many questions as possible, but go ahead and ask your questions as we're going through the discussion. Doesn't mean we may or may not be able to get to them right away, but we will definitely have time at the end. So please add your questions in there. It's meant to be a dialogue today. So thank you. Without further ado, let me start by introducing our panel. So I'll start with myself. I'm Thad West, CEO at ISOS Technology. Excited to be here and leading the discussion of our esteemed panelists today, maybe extreme too. So I'd like to start by introducing Niall Murphy. Niall has worked in internet infrastructure since the mid-90s. His books have sold approximately 250,000 copies worldwide, most notably the award-winning Site Reliability Engineering. And he's probably one of a very few to hold a degree in computer science, mathematics, and poetry studies. He lives in Dublin, Ireland with his wife and 2 children. Welcome, Niall. Happy to have you here.
Cheers.
Up next, I'd like to introduce Ian Bartholomew. Ian is a lead SRE at Noble9. Ian is obsessed with quality and has over 15 years of experience in the industry, whether it be cooking up a perfect pupusa or ensuring the delivery of cloud services with the perfect balance of reliability and fresh features, all at the optimal cost. Ian has contributed to the pursuit of reliability. A true pioneer in the emergence of site reliability engineering, playing key roles at companies like Google, Nike, Disney, Hulu, and others. Ian holds a Bachelor of Fine Arts from the San Francisco Art Institute, where he first developed that keen eye for quality. Ian is a founding member of the Open SLO open source initiative and is a key member of the SRE team at Noble9. Ian, welcome. Happy to have you here today.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
Great. And last but not least, Henrik Rekted. Henrik is a cloud native advocate at Dynatrace, the leading observability platform. Prior to Dynatrace, Henrik has worked at a partner solution as a partner solution evangelist at Neotis, delivering webinars and building prototypes to enhance the capability of NeoLoad. He's been working in the performance world more than 15 years, delivering projects in all contexts, including extremely large cloud testing on the most demanding business areas, such as trading applications, video on demand, sports, websites, etc. Henrik is also one of the organizers for the Performance Advisory Council. Henrik, welcome.
Yes, thank you.
Excellent. Great, good to have you. Okay, well, let's get the discussion kicked off, and let's start with DevOps. Our topic today is from Build to Run, talking about DevOps to SRE. So Henrik, why don't you lead us off with some foundational information? Why DevOps? What problems does it address?
I mean, first of all, before we move to DevOps, we have shifted quite a bit since the last 15 years. Everyone was talking about Agile, and now, as the last few years, was everything about DevOps. So what do you move to Agile or even to DevOps is basically you're just want to provide a meaningful and good user experience to your customers. So to be able to do that, you need to be able to get the feedback in time and adjust your applications based on your users. So yeah, that's the main core concept of DevOps. The other concepts, of course, is you're mixing dev and operation practices together. In theory, of course. And then, of course, you have all those continuous everything. So by continuous everything, there is the concept of continuous development that comes along with that, continuous integration, continuous delivery, and so on and so on. And at the end of the day, we want to deliver, be faster to deploy releases on production, to get the feedback and adjust our releases depending on our users. So we always looking at our customers to make sure that we are providing the good product in their hands. And if we are able to provide good product to the customers, maybe we are able to reduce the number of defects or issues, and which means we are spending less times working on bugs and more time providing innovation. So I think DevOps is also a way on the paper to extend and provide innovations and better user experience to our customers.
I love that. I love that, it's anchored in talking about the customer. I love that it's anchored in talking about innovation. And, those are some key themes that should really be driving any organization, no matter what sort of philosophy you take on. Niall, I want to flip it over to you. I've heard you say that DevOps is poorly defined, yet rigorously enforced. Can you expand on that? Maybe talk about some of the challenges that, bringing in this DevOps mentality so that creates in organizations.
Yeah, no worries. So I think the first thing to say is no shade intended by previous remark or other related remarks. But I think it's notable that despite everything Henrik has said, which is true about trying to shorten time between doing something and actually doing the thing, particularly when it involves shipping software to customers, adding new features, etc. Despite everything that Henrik has said in that context, what we actually experience when we go out and ask people, what is this DevOps thing anyway? Like, what do you find yourself doing? The overwhelming thing that I hear from customers, folks in the industry, et cetera, is that DevOps is this philosophy, an approach to how you organize work with respect to doing software delivery. Note, I'm kind of carefully scoping that for a moment. Software delivery inside an organization. When you kind of poke and prod at that and go like, what else is there? There are folks who can talk articulately about this, this thing called CAMS, which it's an acronym that expands to measurement, continuous delivery, lean, and so on and so forth. But overall, I think the message that I get when I talk to people about DevOps is mostly that it's a philosophy about how you should organize the act of doing software in your company, with maybe some organizational recommendations about, hey, maybe if we weren't all in kind of separate teams warring with each other all the time, that would be good. And when you talk to people who are actually doing DevOps, or their job title is DevOps, even though that's kind of like saying I'm an applied philosopher as a job title. When you talk to people who are doing DevOps, you soon find out that, like, I want to say the first two standard deviations of those people are doing CI/CD systems, like Jenkins, Circle CI, whatever. And so there's good things about this, right? We're all reacting to the fact that managing systems, the art of software delivery, and note, I do not say science, but the art of software delivery, the art of managing systems, and so on and so forth, all very difficult. Which is why Jane Austen wrote in the late 1700s, it is a truth universally acknowledged that systems do not manage themselves. Well, she wrote the first part, not the second part. And so there are various kinds of ways, if you acknowledge that managing software processes, managing delivery to customers and so on and so forth is very difficult. There's a number of ways you can react to that. And DevOps is one reaction as a philosophy. And also the people who are doing CI/CD systems are, in some sense, they're being placed against the problem of managing software inside institutions. But another way of reacting to that problem, that life is hard and excrement happens and so on, is a thing that I write about, which is the thing called site reliability engineering, which originated in Google in the early 2000s. So some folks say, and I'm also on record as saying, that DevOps is a philosophy and SRE is an opinionated implementation of that philosophy. And I don't think that's wrong, but I think a slightly more interesting origin story in some sense is the origin story that I sometimes tell about SRE within Google, which is basically when Google's very young, there's, I don't know, 50 people, 50 engineers, 100 engineers, something like that, which is still a very large number for a startup company, of course, but there's some number of engineers. They're all working on the search engine because there's nothing else to work on because it's early. Some subset of those people end up being concerned about what's happening in production. Hey, is that index, like, did we rebuild that since May? Oh, this thing is on fire. And they have all of these concerns about what's actually happening with the product in production. So these people are product engineers. They are software engineers. I mean, that's all that's hired at that stage, I think. I'm not 100% sure. I wasn't around in the very early days. But basically, these folks are software engineers who are software oriented, I should say, with respect to the idea that there are problems to solve, like what kind of tools will we bring to bear on these problems? And it's kind of the native instinct to bring software to bear on these problems. And so these folks, I mean, Ben Traynor Sloss would probably say that they are the same hiring bar as all of the other software engineers or kind of similar organizational observations. But I'll just say that there's a team and some subset of them are just like all the other people on the team, except they care about production and they have software mindset with respect to going and solving those problems. And so if you like drag forward the time slider and have everyone move very fast as it plays the movie really quickly, what you get at the end of that is a bunch of teams called site reliability engineers who work on the products in question, have similar skills, parity of esteem, automation-oriented mindset, so on and so forth, except they just happen to care about the things that you care about when you have to run stuff in production. And so that orientation and that, I suppose, organizational placement produces things that you don't get in the DevOps space as such. You get folks in the DevOps space who talk about like metrics around software delivery and so on. But in particular, things like SLOs and SLIs are conceptual frameworks that you're using to try and manage a service better, but they're not things you'd necessarily think of in a feature development context for a product. And so there's this body of knowledge which is about how to run services better, which is where the opinionated bit of opinionated DevOps comes from. And that's really the distinction as I see it.
I love that. It kind of started us into our next topic. So let's start to go there a little bit. And Ian, I want to give you a chance to jump in here. So you know, a couple of things that Niall touched on was one, some of that, hey, SRE, when we start thinking about it, is an implementation of DevOps. And so, you know, maybe you could just, you know, close the loop on DevOps for us a little bit and see how you kind of make that transition with your customers and what you're hearing out in the field from DevOps. And then let's jump into SRE as well. But why don't you kind of wrap us up on that DevOps topic?
Yeah, I mean, what we've seen is, and what I've experienced in the field is, you know, like now talking about, it's a philosophy. DevOps is a philosophy. You know, it's a set of principles. It's not terribly opinionated, not or prescriptive about, you know, how you do things. Like a lot of the times, like in the SDLC, like in the feedback loop in DevOps, it's not going to necessarily help you prioritize work coming back from the end of that feedback loop. That is something that SRE kind of does have in the form of like SLOs, error budgets, things like that. Allows you to make those informed decisions from the signals that are coming back from that feedback loop. But yeah, like I think Niall and Henrik were talking about, you know, it's DevOps is a culture, it's a philosophy. Sometimes it gets shoehorned into a role. I've been put in that role. I've got that title. It is very hard, and it's very hard when organizations do kind of take that and try and distill it into a role and say, this is, we're doing DevOps. We have a person here that does that, rather than adopting the philosophy at an organizational level. You know, that's one of the critical pieces of that. I think SRE does have does help with that kind of transition, giving more prescriptive definitions and roles for the actions that need to happen.
I love it. Now you definitely hit us up with a good kind of evolution of where SRE fits in. Henrik, I want to hear from you a little bit on that SRE perspective. You're on the front edge with your customers. You guys provide a great platform out there, and a lot of what you provide kind of feeds into this this mindset. So maybe you could give us your perspective and what you're hearing from your customers on the SRE front.
I think a lot of customers, they make the effort to implement this philosophy internally, and they start obviously naturally with the CI/CD, which is Niall mentioned about it. Say, I'm DevOps, I'm doing CI/CD, and suddenly they try to put some quality gates there, and they realize that as a constraint that they have a lot of manual tasks within their automated process, where technically when you're doing automations, you expect to have everything automated, but in the field, you see that you discover that between step, let's say, testing validations and going to production, there is like a 35 hours or 60 or even more sometimes, where you have to wait that someone comes in, look at the results and give his feedback and then share it to someone else. And someone else says, yes, we can go to production. And that doesn't make sense. So that's where most of the customers that reached out to us was related to, how can I be more efficient in my automation? How can I be more efficient if I have an issue in production to auto-remediate that issue? And I think the notion of, we will talk about it later on, but SLI and an SLO is basically the first brick that allow you to be confident on the results of your tests and to be able to automate your test, your deployment or your remediation. So that's most of the customers that reach out to us. It could be from the banking industry, it can be from retailers, or it can be even government institutions. They are all worried about that. So how can I be more efficient when I deliver software without waiting hours and hours and hours? And I think this is a great, I would say, way of extending the automation using those SRE concepts.
Yeah, I love the discussion. I love the, when we first started down this journey in speaking with you guys, it felt like, hey, we're positioning ourselves for this holy war of DevOps versus SRE, and we're really not. We're saying that, SRE is really, helps to provide a methodology and a framework and practices and even tools with some of our tool vendors on to really embrace this discipline. And I love the conversation. And so now you gave us a great kind of origin story there for SRE, for site reliability engineering. Talk to us a little bit about SLOs. We've touched on that topic. Let's start to uncover that a little bit. Walk us through that.
Sure. Yeah, so I suppose the first thing to say is what SLO stands for. I mean, it's related to other concepts you may or may not have heard of, SLIs, but SLAs as well, which I suppose are more broadly known in the industry. The expansion of the acronym SLA is service level agreement, but here we'll really be focusing on SLIs, but mostly SLOs, service level indicators and service level objectives. And the basic idea here is that software, while it's running, collects information about how it's running, names this information, which we'll call a metric, for example, total number of requests or something like that. Every time you have a new request, you add a number to that. And SLOs are objectives for some of those numbers, or some of those metrics, to be more precise, which ideally, like this is the idea, are connected to user journeys or things that the user is trying to get done with your software. And so the real innovation here is not necessarily the idea of metrics, well established. If you come from the business world, KPIs are exactly the same thing, except with different letters, because, well, anyway, because. And the innovation isn't necessarily in the idea that there should be targets for things. That's also not without precedent in the world. But the innovation really in the domain of SLOs is when you come from an IT background, the idea that actually this is a conversation between business and engineering about what exact experience the users should have with the software. And often this is expressed as some number, like often composed of 9s, decimal points, and 5s. So 99.5% availability or something. Every request for creating an account should complete within, or sorry, 99.5% of requests for completing an account should complete within 200 milliseconds or equivalent. So you're basically looking at the things your software is doing, which support user journeys or tasks that the users want to accomplish, and agreeing between business and engineering what that should be. And it turns out that this is a tremendously powerful kind of organizational hack, because harking back to the previous conversation where we say running things is difficult and so on, like part of the reason why running things is difficult is because it's easy for decision makers to be relatively insulated from the effects of what's going on, the kind of Sturm und Drang of day-to-day work. And it turns out that if you have a situation like that, you get inefficiencies and bad user outcomes because you're not connecting through the intent of the business with what the user experience should be, with how prioritization should work in engineering. And it's really SLOs as prioritization mechanism, which I think is the big thing here.
I love it. I love that it's that conversation. I think you quantified it as the innovation is really how to have that conversation between business and engineering. And, you know, it's so important because a lot of times, you're right, metrics aren't new. And a lot of times metrics just feel arbitrary without the context of what the customer expects. I mean, and really pulling the customer and business into that conversation, you know, hopefully gets you to some numbers that make a lot of sense. Ian, I want to flip it over to you a little bit. You know, Niall talked about an origin story of SRE being in Google and, you know, in the early 2000s, right? Why are we talking about this today? Why Noble 9 today? You know, you guys have an SLO platform, you know, kind of help bring us up to speed where you guys kind of see this opportunity and where the conversation is.
Yeah, so kind of like what Niall was saying, you know, running things is hard. Turns out doing SLOs and error budgets are also hard. If you're at Google and you're going to have teams like dedicated to running these platforms, calculating these error budgets and whatnot, great, you know, that's awesome. But a lot of places, a lot of startups, a lot of companies and organizations don't have the resources to be able to do that, and also that kind of domain knowledge about, you know, what are the maths. You know, how do these get calculated? And so that's where we come in. You know, we handle like the math on the calculations, the processing of all of those. These are all like pretty big lifts, to be honest. Also, just pulling the metrics. You know, we have agents that pull from our data, from our integrations into the data sources. That's also something that's not an easy lift. You would have to build all those integrations yourself if you wanted to roll your own. And again, these are things that larger organizations I know have and can do. But we're looking at other organizations that maybe don't want to take on that burden, aren't able to, and do that. You know, I talked about error budgets. Error budgets are also hard to, you know, there's a lot of math involved in that, and to talk about what error budgets are. Now I kind of led into this talking about, you know, the decision mechanism. Error budgets are also that decision mechanisms. They measure how your SLI is doing against your SLO over time. They kind of define how unreliable your service is permitted to be over that time window. So it will be that a day, week, a month, or whatever it is. The way that you calculate what your error budget is you subtract what your SLO is. So let's say that's 99% or 95. Well, actually for this, let's say it's 99%. You subtract that from 1, you get 1%. So you have a 1% error budget over whatever time window you've defined. So if you're measuring that SLO in minutes of downtime, that your error budget would be minutes over that time window of downtime that you're allowed to have. And that serves as your decision mechanism. You can say, like, if you're still within your error budget, cool, keep shipping features. If you have exhausted your error budget, might be time to have your team pivot and focus on reliability for that time and stop feature work. Henrik has talked about the quality gate. That's something that's this is what that is. You can stop your deployments if you've exhausted your error budget until that error budget builds back up and you're within your parameters.
Love it. When I was first introduced to the concept of error budget, obviously probably much later than you guys were, what it brought home for me was that, again, it's what you were talking about. Like, what does the business and the customer experience expect? And there's a certain level of errors that we're comfortable with, and we don't have to set our engineering team on fire every time that there's a problem, because not all problems are necessarily bad for the customer, and they could stifle innovation. So if we put all of our effort into solving every single problem that comes up, then we're choking out innovation. So I don't know. It's a really powerful concept. Henrik, I'd like to hear from you, on this topic of SLOs, SLIs, and kind of get your perspective on it and how you see it.
So what I'd like to, first of all, Dynatrace is one of the biggest observability platforms. So we collect metrics, events, traces, whatever. And since many years ago, people were managing their environment based on alerting. Alerts are great, but if we make an analogy with sports, it's like I'm preparing for a marathon, and my heart is going too high, so I get an alert from the watch. But does this alert help me to be better and reach the targets of the marathon? No, you need objectives. You need to define them properly and follow those objectives. And I think we just implement those practices that we have in sports or other practices in the IT, and that's wonderful. So the SLI, just to add, it's a metric, but it's more than a metric. For me, it's a ratio. So you need to basically, if you want to put a ratio on your response times, then you have to define what is an acceptable response times. And then you will calculate the number of requests that was respecting your acceptable response times versus the number of requests in total. And then you will get that ratio. And with that ratio, you will be able to put an SLO. And this is great. I mean, we have a lot of customers that have started to understand the concept of SLIs, understand the concept of SLOs, and they are basically utilizing it in their production environment, but also before, like Jan just mentioned, the quality gates. They want to have a systems, and I just mentioned before, that will allow them to basically make sure that they are always close to the targets that they have defined, and that target will allow them to promote their release to the production, to staging or other environments. So we have customers that utilize, we have built since 4 or 5 years now. We have a framework called Captain, and Captain is using this concepts of SLI and SLO, and we have the quality gate. So we have customers using the open source version of Captain, and also we have customers using the SaaS version, which is cloud automation SaaS that we provide. And they are basically, as a feedback we have received recently, says we are not shipping any release in production without Dynatrace blessing. And I think that is just, first of all, it's just great to receive that type of feedback from the customers, but that shows how powerful the method, the practice is, because they are saving so much time. They're able to have a feedback on how reliable their releases is in just a few minutes, compared to a few months ago where they were waiting 60 or 35 hours to get a manual feedback from someone. So that's just, I think it's amazing.
That is a great story. I mean, I love it. It's great to hear customer stories and how they're interacting and solving problems. I think that's one of the things I really enjoy. And in the role of being a consultant is just hearing from different customers. So I think that's great. It kind of leads us nicely into our next topic, which is, if you get out there in the world, you hear a lot of shift left, shift right. And so, knowing that these terms can have different connotations depending on who you ask, what time of day it is, and whether or not it is a leap year, I'd like to challenge our panel to have a discussion on that front. So Henrik, why don't you lead us off and talk to us about what the shift left concept, throw a definition out there for our panel to chew on.
I mean, from my perspective, shift left is the way of starting early as much as possible to detect issues as early as possible. So then you're focusing on your innovation. So shift left means the developers will build their code, and they will also be in relationship with the business to find what are the objectives. They know their services also. They will probably also define objectives related to how their code will behave. And then they start building their sort of pipeline where they will validate and make sure that they're always close to the target. So if you start earlier, then you get a feedback faster, and you are just controlling what you are going to send over production. And that also allow you, if you start early, to introduce a lot of great concepts like disruption. So chaos engineering, for example. So if I do chaos engineering in a non-production environment, I already have an idea on how to handle some specific situations. And then once I'm mature enough, I can then move on this chaos engineering in production when you do blue-green canary releases or blue-green deployments and automate everything. So I think, start earlier and don't think that monitoring or observability is only for production without seeing things. So without us having a systems that gives you the visibility, then you're not able to be able to provide good products at the end of your cycle.
I like it. Ian, I'm going to throw it over to you to give us take the other position. Take us through shift right.
Yeah. So my understanding of shift right is more taking that testing that it would more be put into pre-production environments and doing it in production. We see a lot of that now with kind of some of like canary deployments, like Henrik was talking about with chaos testing, more doing testing in production on a live environment to get actual feedback, but also being able to have kind of those graceful fallbacks. So you're not doing it without a net. You have a safeguard in place with the testing. Noble 9, I think, is one of those things that one of those tools for testing in production, because you're getting SLOs from a live environment, from actual users, being able to make those decisions that you need to make based on actual users at that point. And so we try and move that, so when we talk about shift right, that's kind of what we're talking about. For us too, in my experience, it's been very hard to get accurate kind of measurements in a pre-production environment for a lot of those kind of user interactions. I like to call it the myth of staging, because as much as you try, the staging will never actually be like production. It's kind of like pursuing, 9 nines or whatever. The more you try and get it, the closer you try and get to it, the more time and money and effort it's going to be to get to that mirror. So just moving that over into production, I think it's very powerful, being able to have those SLOs giving you the feedback of the actual user interaction is powerful, and it allows you to also kind of watch what happens with those when you're doing chaos testing. Like if you're within your error budget, let's do some chaos testing. Let's have some planned downtime to see what happens with that. Let's do a load test and see what happens with that. Let's do a stress test and see what happens. And we can use our SLOs to gauge the performance of the system. Again, from a user's perspective? Because again, because SLOs are from a user's perspective, how does it affect the user's experience when we do a chaos test, when we do a load test?
I like it. Two great definitions, Niall. If we run with those definitions, you know, give us some of your thoughts on the trading off of shifting. Are we shifting left? Are we shifting right? Like, what are some of your thoughts as you process what the panels put out there?
You must understand that I'm the kind of person for whom shift left means multiply the contents of a CPU register by 2 very quickly. And I expect like 7 people got that joke. But for the moment, I will have to say I'm kind of a little bit allergic to those terms, not necessarily because the activities encompassed by those terms are worthless or worthful or whatever. But I think the viewpoint from which they are issued is maybe the wrong viewpoint. I prefer prevention versus cure. And I'm not quite sure that maps exactly to shift left and right, but it's clear in my head if I think about the activities that would come under the heading of prevention of production incidents, and like chaos engineering, and in particular the post-mortem and root cause analysis process post-incident that most organizations, or at least, well, it's not most organizations, but hopefully at some point, maybe many organizations would do this. And those kind of feedback loops, particularly with respect to putting things back in to the design phase of the SDLC, which then make their way out to production. So you kind of have a feedback loop of continual improvement. To my mind, those are prevention-oriented techniques. And over here in cure-oriented, it's basically incident management. And I suppose change management, you can make an argument for other kinds of things as well. But if I think about it as prevention versus cure, I mean, I remember somebody said to me once that, like, if you're running a production system and you have a choice between being able to perfectly resolve all problems within a second, or being able to perfectly design the system so that it never has any problems, you'd pick the first. And the reason you'd pick the first is because, of course, even if you perfectly design the system, over time, the environment will change, the number of users will change, blah, blah, blah. You'll end up hitting some kind of problem at some point. And instead, in the converse universe, where you're just going along and your incredibly brilliant incident resolution team just fixes every problem within a second of it happening, like, that's obviously a much better universe. My response would be, actually, neither of those universes are available to you. You have neither the choice of resolving everything within a second or perfectly designing stuff. So you have to invest effort in both. So I'm just going to step gently away from the shift left and shift right conversation, and
I like it.
Get on with delivering value.
It takes it out of, you know, there's the ideal, like, hey, if everything were perfect, we could do this. And if everything were perfect, but I think you bring a great point, which is, look, this is reality. Nothing is perfect. And, you know, we have to take a couple of different tacks to make sure that our customer experience is good, that we're not stifling innovation. So I love that. I love that approach. Okay, well, let's, you know, we've talked a lot about kind of the stuff in theory. Ian, I know you worked with the Dynatrace team and put together a 5-10 minute demo. I'd love to just kind of see, you know, get some solidness around this. So I'm going to turn it over to you and let you kind of show us what this looks like out in the real world.
All right, awesome. I'm going to steal the screen while I do that. Where did that go?
And while you're doing that, I will say that we have some great questions coming in, both through the chat and through the Q&A. Either one's fine. Q&A will have visibility to everybody, but chat will still see them. So again, keep those questions coming in. Great questions, and we do have time at the end to do that. So thank you.
Cool. So yeah, like I was saying earlier, Noble 9 is, it helps your organization understand your reliability goals. It collects from existing observability tools and calculates your performance based on your SLO. And you can see here we have our grid view that has all of your error budgets, your burn rates, your reliability burn down at a high level. grouped by services, and these are logical grouping of services, not necessarily what service they actually come from. You can see here we are now on the detail view, which gives us a better, like more detailed view of our reliability, our burn downs, and all the meta information for that SLO in a given time frame. And you can also adjust the time frame here, and you can see when occurrences happen. And also anomalies. And here we can go back and see like the last 24 hours and really drill into what happened during these events, like what happened when the SLI spiked, and what the effect of that was on our burn down. Really quick here, so yeah, again, we're also able to define multiple targets too per SLO. So we can have a good, bad, okay experience and have different SLOs for that. We have a couple different ways of making SLOs. This is going to be our wizard. You can select our service. You can select your data source and your metric selector here. This is a Dynatrace query. So we're going to be pulling from Dynatrace. Here we can say for the time window for like how long it is. So minute, hour, day, or calendar aligned. So like say the last month or whatever, and you can add your objective. So this is where you say, I want to hit 99.9, or I want to hit 50% or 75%, or whatever is proper for your service. And again, you can define multiple objectives. Here we have some meta information, and as well as the alert policies, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. The other way that you can make SLOs with Noble 9 is via YAML files. Here we have a YAML file that it is exactly what we were just seeing on the last screen, just in YAML format. You can see the Prometheus queries here, and all of the different configuration options. We interface with the service via our CLI tool, SlowCuddle. You can make changes to those files and update them. You can interact with the Noble 9 service through here. This is a great tool for integrating into a CI/CD platform. You would just put your SLOs into version control and use SlowCuddle to update them. So right now we're going to pull our agents. You can see how our agents are defined here. You can use this to update your agents in CI/CD. Here we're pulling down some of our services. This is how you would put them into your version control, into a YAML file. Pretending right now we did some edits. It's also really easy to then update the service with just SlowCuddle apply F. And if you're familiar with kubectl, it's very similar. We kind of take a lot of the paradigms and patterns from that and applied it to SlowCuddle. You can see we've successfully created that. Again, very easy to integrate into a CI/CD pipeline. We have a number of different data sources we can pull from. We can see a Prometheus, New Relic, Dynatrace, App Dynamics, Splunk. It is all agent based, where you have an individual agent you need to deploy out into your environment that will pull from that data source. And we'll look at that in here in a second. And here we can see the configuration for our Dynatrace agent and the attached SLO. So the SLO that agent is informing. The other thing we're going to we'll look at here in a second is the alerts and the alert policies, because that's going to be an important thing like you want to be let known, or you want to know when your SLOs are underperforming or you've exhausted your error budgets. Here we have a JIRA alert when we've have 99% remaining on our SL or on our error budget. You can see here, nothing up my sleeve, no alerts. We can test this just to show you how that works. We can do a test alert, and you can see that now that alert has shown up as a JIRA ticket. So like if you have a certain amount of your error budget remaining, you can have an alert get sent to JIRA to say like investigate this or whatever you want to have. It's a very flexible alert and integration. And you can see here we have webhooks, Slack integration. The webhook is nice because then you can have an arbitrary integration, whatever you want right there. And again, we have CodeFresh integration, or CodeFresh integration for our webhook here. And you can also integrate with PagerDuty, Opsgenie. There's a number of different targets we have, and we're for alerts, and we're continuing to add more. Another nice thing that we have that's really good for kind of the executive level is reports. Oh, actually, hold on one second. I'm going to do one thing here. Wanted to look at the oh, sorry, so we wanted to look at the agent, and all the agent is just a Docker image. And here's we give you the exact commands to run. So this will run our Docker image locally, as well as commands for doing a Kubernetes apply or kubectl apply. Again, these are the error conditions, or alert conditions. We have a number of different ways you can define when to get alerted. Error budget remaining, error budget exhausted, burn rate, whatever works for you and what works best for your service. You just define the project, the display name, and the severity, so you can have either long or short runway for those alerts, and how you want to then alert. So again, Opsgenie, Discord, ServiceNow, Slack, PagerDuty, or just a webhook. Like I was saying, sorry about that, but yeah, we're also able to generate reports and give you a more detailed and specific view of how certain SLOs are performing. Here, we're just going to pick a couple that we have here for just a few services, and which SLOs to include in the report. This is good for kind of like a review cycle, being able to say, okay, for these key SLOs, how are they performing within the given time frame? And so here you can take a look at how these were performing. This is currently for the last month, but you can change that to be, let's say, last 14 days or whatever your review cycle is. And then another thing we've recently added is a service health overview, which gives you an overview of all of your services and the SLOs within those services and how they're doing. Like, and if you know, circles aren't your thing, we got hexagons. So this allows you to sort in different ways, but it gives you a good kind of top level overview of how all of your services are doing as defined by the health of those individual SLOs. Like you can see, DuckDuckGo is very healthy right now. And that concludes our Noble 9 demo.
Awesome. Thank you, Ian. Really appreciate that. Okay, so we just have a few minutes left. I have one more kind of rapid fire question for the group, and it's really about in 30 seconds or less, you know, we've talked about a lot of theories, a lot of concepts. We've seen some things in action. Give our audience a quick way to get started. So rapid fire, so that we do have time for Q&A. So Ian, why don't we start with you? Where would you recommend somebody start if they're on their journey of SRE and SLO?
I think the two that I would recommend the most are, I'm going to, Niall, I hope you don't mind, but I'm going to plug your book, the SRE book, as well as the Implementing Service Level Objectives book, which was written by Alex Hidalgo, and which now also helped write there too. So those are the two that I've referenced the most, that stay on my desktop or my desk at the most. So,
got it. Great. Niall, how about yourself?
Yeah, so I suppose the first thing to say is I don't actually make any money from those books, so you can recommend more or less whatever you want, that's fine. But the second thing to say is there's a GitHub list of awesome SRE resources, I think that's what it's called, which is maybe not for beginners, but it is a curated list of places to start Well, I suppose those are a little bit in conflict. It's a curated list of stuff to investigate and read when you're trying to find out about stuff, and it's blocked according to, or grouped according to subject areas. So that's probably a decent place to go.
Great, love it. Henrik, how about you?
I will start with if you want to do SLI and SLO, you need to have a decent observability platform. So make sure that you're collecting metrics from your environments, the user experience, anything that would allow you to define later on the right SLI and SLO. So I think that would be the biggest start. Then there's no standard SLO. So understand your users, your requirements, and implement the right rules, and continuously improve it. You can adapt your rules in time. It's not, you don't create a rule and then it's done. Now you can improve it based on in time. I would say that start with a couple of services, start very simple, and then increment and make things easier for the future. And if you want to try it out, what Ian provided, you can check out on the Dynatrace Hub. There is the Noble 9 integration, so that will be also a good start to take advantage of what Ian just showed us a few minutes ago.
Awesome. And from my perspective, I am the least qualified to give recommendations here, but maybe that makes me the most qualified because I've had to start from ground zero the most recently. And for me, one is the Noble 9 team worked to put on a SLOconf, SLO conference. There's a lot of great video material out there on that, a lot of great talks from industry leaders. It was a great success, and there's a lot of digestible content. So check that out. Coursera has a couple of great courses on it. If you search for SRE, a couple of good courses out there that I know some of our folks have gone through. And then, go into the source, sre.google.com has a bunch of stuff there too. So Tad, if we could flash up that, so, here's a couple other places to get started. One is, so we do run a boot camp, and I'll tie it back to one of the questions where one of the questions in the chat was, hey, after you've explained SLOs and SLIs and why it matters, but the team went off and did something kind of cowboy on their own. Well, basically that's a lack of understanding. And that's, what we're trying to accomplish with our SLO bootcamp is really get the organization and the teams oriented around the concepts so that they can go off and build all of the great SLOs that, need to be uncovered and discovered in your organization. And then on the Dynatrace side, just point your little iPhone or Android device at that URL there and pull it up, and you'll get started there with the Dynatrace team. So we got about 6 minutes left for questions. We got a lot that came in. So looks like we answered one too. I'm going to start with this one in the Q&A widget here. We speak of error budgets usually in the context of availability over a specified time, realizing that error rates can factor into error budgets. Could someone single out and expand upon how error rates can be best approached via SLIs, SLOs? Really interested in new or independent views or good examples. So Henrik, I don't know if that's a good one for you. Ian, I think you guys both kind of dumped into numbers. I don't know who wants to take a swing at that one.
I think the error rates, keep in mind that if you use SLOs in production, make your target achievable. You're not in testing. So if you put really strong barriers, it will be very difficult you will just be hit by the error budget on a daily basis. So make achievable targets. And for that, I think there is the best way of defining the achievable targets is to understand your environments. If you can tolerate error rates, but if you evaluate them every hour, or if you evaluate them every 15 days or 7 days, the error rates will be completely different, and the target will be completely different. So I think knowing your environment and defining the achievable target will allow you to have to avoid having big error budgets coming out of that.
I think one of the things that I might add to that too is I would take a look at what error rates you're trying to measure. because there's a lot of errors, I think, that like within application code that wouldn't necessarily matter for the user, keeping in mind again that like SLOs should be, very user centric. If we're talking about errors in responses, so like you get a response, your response from your application is like a 500 or something, that would be something you might want to track. But just again, errors with an application code, unless it surfaces as a negative user experience, you might not need to track that in an SLO.
Got it. Yeah, great answer. Let me throw another question out there. This one is from a shift left perspective. Basically, the question is around, hey, I have development teams that are not convinced it's a good idea to start creating unit functional and non-functional tests. They're really concerned about their team's velocity and don't want to be slowed down with, inconsequential things like testing and writing good unit tests. How would you approach that team and kind of shake them into that this is something that should be done?
Okay. So who you want?
Niall, you want to take a shot? It looks like you kind of had a.
Sure, yeah.
Sorry, my bad for not throwing it out there.
It's all good. The margin of this talk is not long enough to contain the correct response to this, which could go on for hours and hours, but I'll say two things. The first one is, if it is actually the case that in your organizational culture, the consequences of the development team's actions are a complete, economic externality. In other words, they can do whatever they want and no one else gets to say anything about it, then I would advise you to change companies. But the second thing I would say is, actually, it's pretty, it is difficult, but it has been done. There is a book about how Google injected testing culture. I mean, it's about how Google does tests. I think that's actually the title of it. But it partially talks, if I remember correctly, about how Google injected testing discipline into its engineering culture, which was not there at the start. And they all had the crazy, don't slow me down, I'm just writing code, this is fine.jpg style approaches. And it is possible to change, but of course it's as slow as changing human beings is generally, which is quite slow. You can do some things in software and you can orient the conversation around user experience and objectively measured user experience via SLOs, which is one of the other good things you get from this framework. So change is possible.
Love it. We have just a minute left, so I just kind of want to end it right here. I think it's been a great discussion. I want to thank the audience today for spending the time with us this morning, this afternoon, this evening, depending on where you are on the planet. And thank you to our panel. A lot of really knowledgeable folks on this panel, and really appreciate you guys lending your expertise and having a discussion with us. So thank you, everybody. And there's a little bit more information about us, but yeah, would love to keep the conversation going, and if look forward to sharing the recording with everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.